So we're both married people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a food or a meal or something that you only eat whenever your spouse is out of town?
Yeah, I guess so. I have a few. My spouse is picky.
What's your single life meal?
Single life. Wings
Wings, that's a good one.
is one. Yeah. Give me some buffalo wings.
Yeah, because you can look really nasty because you don't have to worry about it. You can just be like, yeah, look at me, I'm a monster.
Well, I wouldn't care so much, but it's just wing places don't have much for her.
That's true. That's true.
So,
Good call. I have two. Mine is either, if I'm cooking, I'm being industrious, it's spaghetti, and I just eat spaghetti all weekend.
yeah.
And that's mostly just because it's like really cheap and easy to eat. And I'm just like, whatever, I don't care. And then
Yeah.
the other one is like a nasty Whataburger meal. It's just a sloppy sandwich.
Yeah, that's a good pair. Yeah, I guess if I'm cooking, then like cooking myself a steak.
Yeah.
Get a steak. It's in some instant mashed potatoes because I'm a loser.
Trash.
Yeah, and some asparagus. That's what I would do.
That sounds good. Okay. Well, I'm probably going to do spaghetti after this. So that's my plan.
Nice. All right, let's get into today's reading.
Well, listeners, you don't know this because I edited it out, but I just took a 5-minute break to read the reading because your boy forgot to do the reading. Your boy being me, not Grady. He was very responsible. Look, guys, I've got a pretty big page rate to hit these days. So
Yeah.
it just didn't happen.
Things happen, and if you are in a similar boat,
If you
you're
need to
like,
pause.
oh yeah, they told me last week that I should do this reading, but life has happened. Hey, do it now. It'll take you 5 minutes, really seriously,
Like, real, I'm looking at a timer from our recording, and it took me about maybe less than 5 minutes. So it's very short. It's on Marxists.org if you want to check it out. This is entitled Combat Liberalism, not Combat Liberalism, but it's by Mao. So
All right, let's start from the beginning. A reading from the Book of Mao.
everyone stand up and hold hands.
Yeah, please stand as you are able. Don't. Do whatever
No,
you're doing.
yeah, whatever.
It's fine.
So I wanted to ask right up front, what would be a definition of liberalism? Because this gives several definitions, but to me, they all eat around like the edges. Like what's the straight up and down definition?
So straight up and down, in terms of what we're talking about here, what communists mean when we're talking liberalism, we're essentially meaning like capitalism, or in this case, capitalist ideology. So the concept of self, the concept of one's relation to society, like the value of individualism versus society, those sorts of ideas, I think, is what they're talking about with liberalism. It's the ideology of capitalism. So he talks about this later, but basically it's this idea that we talked about on the show before of freedom from responsibility.
Yeah.
It's all about me.
Yeah. Freedom to do whatever the fuck you want.
Right, yeah. At the expense of other people, if that happens to be the case. It doesn't matter. You're the most important.
Okay, cool. Because I think coming from an American or Western perspective, you hear about liberalism and it's painted as that's what the left is, which we know that's not true. But
Yeah.
it's I don't know, in my mind, I'm thinking, these are your run-of-the-mill Democrats. Your progressives are probably also around this as well, depending on how far left they are. But this sounds like it would also encompass conservatives too.
Yep. Yes, that's all of them.
All of them. Okay.
They're all over there. You go far enough, and when you get to monarchists or
Just straight fascists,
or
yeah.
something, they're not doing liberalism anymore. That's illiberal. Sometimes you'll hear that term, meaning they don't want people to even to have those rights to do whatever they want either. They want it regimented, but in a shitty way.
Okay. So if you're struggling with squaring that kind of American definition with this, I don't know, I thought about it in terms of the right. Their freedoms are things like they want the freedom to carry guns and to discriminate against other people, and they want freedom for other things, right?
Yeah, they want, I think what we said of they want to be able to do whatever the fuck they want. That's their individuality or their definition of freedom, liberty, liberalism. That's what they're talking about. Same thing with markets, the freedom to trade however you want to with no oversight, the freedom to rip off your workers to whatever extent you want.
Yeah, they don't want to pay taxes. They want to be free from that. So, okay, that helps to think of it more as maybe freedom-loving America or something, or freedom-loving people in general.
Yes, and I think that Mao has an interesting notion of like, there are characteristics, personal characteristics that are tied to seeing the world that way that we can get basically infected with, even as communists. And like, we can accidentally, that can bleed over into the way we see the world, and it can mess us up. Like, we can be selfish because we're raised in this capitalist society or whatever, and that, that'll throw off the movement.
Well, let's get into it then.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to start with a little bit of historical context too.
Yeah, when did he write this?
He writes this in 1937.
Okay.
In September, and this is during the Yan'an rectification movement.
I don't remember what that was. I'm not going to lie.
It's okay. So yeah, this is when the communists in China had just finished the Long March. That was when like the nationalist forces were basically trying to surround them and kill them, and they had to escape and do a big long retreat.
Yeah.
And most of them died on the way. Those that survived end up in Yan'an, which is like this remote mountainous province, so it's kind of like safer there, and they start building themselves back up again. They get tons more recruits during this time, but a lot of these recruits are brand new to this communism thing, and so Mao's trying to shape this whole thing into a cohesive movement. The Yan'an rectification movement actually starts in 1942, and that's when he publishes this. So he actually wrote this a little bit before then, but he kind of brings this out and says like, "Hey, we need to do this. We need to." We talked about it during our episode, part 1 of our Mao episode. But basically, it's kind of a way to get everyone on the same page ideologically, / to kind of change people's minds. Or get rid of people who weren't going to change their minds about things. You see different writings of this. A lot of the sources on like the main Wikipedia page are very like anti-Mao sources. So I don't want to put too much weight on it, but it doesn't look great. This is where we were talking about like they have struggle sessions and self-criticisms and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's a lot of the kind of, when we're talking about the time period of this, that's what we're saying is the party is trying to get more cohesive at the time.
Yeah, trying to see who's with it and who needs to leave.
Yeah.
Okay. So where were they getting these new recruits from? Were they just like turning from the National Army being like, actually, no, I don't like this? Or
I mean, it was coming from all over. So, I mean, you had peasants joining, you had intellectuals from the city who had been traveling way the hell out there to join them. Like, really, they were becoming popular. And people were seeing them as the next best hope to free China.
Cool. So that, I think, makes sense because he's pretty harsh in this. Got a lot of standards.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we start up top. We stand for active ideological struggle because it is the weapon for ensuring unity within the party and the revolutionary organizations in the interest of our fight. Every communist and revolutionary should take up this weapon.
Okay, so right off the bat, this is an ideological conflict. Like, this is, like, we're winning hearts and minds, I guess?
Kind of, yeah. It means figuring out what's the correct approach to the revolutionary situation that they're in. Like, we have to find that. Like, I don't think it means so much ideological struggle, like arguing over ideas, or arguing to be petty or to be vain or whatever. He kind of talks about that later. But it means, like, it's important that we figure out what's the right thing to do. We figure out ideologically what we believe and stick to that core. Like, we have to be on the same page so that we can destroy our common enemy of capitalism.
Okay. All right. Next paragraph, though, he says, but liberalism rejects ideological struggle and stands for unprincipled peace, thus giving rise to a decadent Philistine attitude and bringing about political degeneration in certain units and individuals in the party and the revolutionary organizations. So basically saying, like, liberalism in this sense of the word is about I mean, keeping the peace and saying like, okay, let's just work together, and it ends up like watering everything down.
Yeah, it's excessively accommodating to the point that you're basically letting in like Hillary stands and stuff. You know, like not the translation isn't exact, but like you're letting in.
He says it.
Yeah, you're kind of like allowing people who are not really trying to do what you're trying to do, which is like, it's fine to kind of like work with them to some extent, I think, but not like allow them to be party members. Like, you don't
they
want,
can't be the ones calling the shots.
Yeah, you don't want them to become in control of your movement, because then they're going to derail you into, hey, the biggest thing we can ask for is a jobs program or something, you know?
That makes sense. I mean, it's like if you're like, okay, I want to start a softball team, and you let in anyone who's interested in sports, and then they're like, actually, we're going to do football. And you're like, this is not why I'm here.
Yeah. They'll change it. Again, it's not saying you can't work with people or tactically use them. I mean, Mark says in the manifesto, right, we're going to use our enemies and then turn them on them. It's fine.
Yeah.
But you don't want to make them, you know, assistant party chairman or something.
Well, and I think this is, to me, the inherent flaw of the Democratic Party in general, is those bitches love to lose. That's their favorite thing to do.
Yeah, it's almost like they're just defending capital.
I mean, it is. Like, I really think even if they they have done this when they have all the power, they still manage to lose. Like, they make themselves lose.
Yeah, they're the, what is the team that plays against the Harlem Globetrotters? Like,
oh yeah, there's one. They're like the bad guys.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking. It's like the Washington somethings, or I don't remember. But yes, that's such a great concept. They're like the heel turn of show basketball.
Yeah, the Washington Generals. There you go.
I knew it was Washington. Wow, that's so funny. It's Washington too. No, like it does feel buffoonish in that way too. But and I reference West Wing a lot just because it was very formative in my previous time as a liberal. But they do it all the time. Like, if you've ever watched that show, I mean, if you haven't, just like don't, you're fine. But if you're curious, as a anthropological study in the 2000 brained liberal mind, it's like they are so obsessed with their principles, and their principles are all about like decorum and respect and peace and all those things, that they'll just be like, well, we'll let them have this one because that means we're the bigger man. And you're like, but you lost.
Yeah. And the thing with that is that you can only do that when politics is more or less not going to consequentially affect you. It's happening to other people that you don't super care about.
Yeah. And also that only works if the other side like recognizes what you're doing. That's like, just like, I don't know, putting up with a really shitty person and being like, well, I'm being the bigger person here by just accepting how shitty they treat me. It's like, they're just going to keep treating you like shit. Like,
yeah, true.
They're not going to change unless they are also a good person and recognize that. Like, they're not going to.
All right. So then we get into our taxonomy of liberalism.
Yes, tell me about all the different types. Let me collect them into my Pokédex.
All right, yeah, and I think we can tag ourselves as we come up, because I'm sure listeners and ourselves will end up with some of these qualities to some degree.
Yeah, probably.
All right, liberalism manifests itself in various ways. To let things slide for the sake of peace and friendship when a person has clearly gone wrong, and refrain from principled argument because he is an old acquaintance, a fellow townsman, a schoolmate, a close friend, a loved one, an old colleague, or old subordinate, or to touch on the matter lightly instead of going into it thoroughly so as to keep on good terms. The result is that both the organization and the individual are harmed. This is one type of liberalism.
I think this is one that you are and I am not.
Yes,
I start shit with everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I am just too accommodation I guess so, with people in my life, in my personal life. That's what I do. And professionally as well. Like, if I'm talking about stuff, I have to be like, okay, so some people say that whatever, and then some people say that this, no matter what side it is, you know, that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's that's kind of weird.
I mean, I have to mask at work. Like, I'm obviously not going around telling people I'm a communist at work.
Yeah, what if we killed the bourgeoisie?
That'd be pretty cool. In terms, though, of like less of a personal view and more of like a, let's pretend we're actually in a communist party, this would translate to, again, just trying to get along with everyone to the point where like that's not healthy. Like, you should be able to resolve conflict, you know?
Right. Yeah. And it is talking about, in terms of working in a party, letting things slide off the rails eventually, right? It's like a little bit of deviation here. You know, let's keep everybody happy. We can't go too crazy because Jim is, you know, still a liberal, still learning, but we don't want to offend him. But, you know, and then eventually that just slides on into, we would like, you know, shorter working hours within capitalism, which is great, but like that cannot be your only goal as a communist party, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes I think, though, sometimes I can't tell if we're so broken that we would take anything at this point, or if like we're so broken that we will not just accept scraps. I don't know where we are yet. Right now, I feel like, you know, like imagine tomorrow they're like, hey, actually everyone has healthcare. It's free. There's no loopholes. There's no bullshit. It's just all free and it works and it's good. What do you think would happen?
To what? To the American left?
Yeah. To people who have been clamoring not just for healthcare, but for everything, you know, like, would that be enough of a scrap to keep us happy for a little bit longer?
It's a good exercise, because I think that is where you would see the degrees of liberalism like kind of play out. So you would see some leftists saying, great, we need to defend this at all costs and focus on the defensive strategy like that. And you would see in my opinion, the better ones who
say, thanks, that's not enough.
Yeah, who would take basically the manifesto stance of saying, like, we're going to agitate every step of the way, and as soon as we get it, we're turning around and agitating for more.
Yeah, because I feel like I'm even seeing this in at least the progressive side of the Democrats, not like party Democrats, but I mean like in terms of people I follow who are like liberal and progressive or whatever. They're now more open about supporting like strikes and things like that. Like that's getting a little bit more traction. So I'm super curious to see like what's the tipping point, you know?
Yeah.
At what point are you going to be like, no, that's enough. We've done enough for the workers.
I think it's different for different people, different groups.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Anyone, you know, the people who benefit more from it, who now see themselves with something to lose, will be more defensive, I think.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Sorry, that was just a fun hypothetical.
Yeah. All right, next up, to indulge in irresponsible criticism in private instead of actively putting forward one's suggestions to the organization, to say nothing to people to their faces, but to gossip behind their backs, or to say nothing at a meeting, but to gossip afterwards. You know, he's like looking at people in the crowd when he's saying
I'm talking to you, Dan.
To show no regard at all for the principles of collective life, but to follow one's own inclination. This is a second type.
Okay. This one, I can see this one as well being like tempting to do, because you don't want to call people out in front of other people. Like it's very tempting to be like, well, I'll just talk to them afterwards or something. And like, it's awkward to disagree with people. I think we as a culture don't know how to do it. Like, you remember like after like Trump got elected, there were all these fucking think pieces about like, here's how to talk to your family about politics, or here's how to not talk to your family about politics, or like, and I think people tend to just not, you know, like, and I get it. It's way easier. I kind of don't do it anymore.
We're bad at that because I think in our society, in capitalist society, broadly speaking, this liberal ideology is that if you're not right, like there's something wrong with you as a like you've believed the wrong thing. And that's like worse than getting to learn that you were mistaken and you can fix it.
Yeah, no one can admit that they're wrong in our culture. Like, it's extremely hard to apologize. It's hard to accept apologies, too. That's something I've figured out. Like, we don't have good language for that. Like, for example, if someone, like, misgenders me and they like, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't say it's okay, because it's like, it's not okay. So I just have to say thank you, which also sounds really douchey. But it's just an example of like how our language is not structured for being like, hey, I fucked up. I get it. I'm going to do better. You know, like we just don't do that very often.
Yeah, I agree. I do like the characterization here of individualism at the expense of the masses being liberalism. This is what we were talking about before, right? Because I don't want to seed the ground of individualism to the right, which I think that they kind of have. Like, people think it's their domain, is there for individual freedom. And the communists and the socialists or whatever, they want to take that away.
Yeah, that's definitely the narrative. The classic axes are like personal freedom, but like economic strictness, that's liberalism, and then like fewer personal freedoms and less economic policies, that's like conservative. But it depends on the freedoms. Like, we've talked about that too. Like, they don't give a shit about certain freedoms, you know?
What good is freedom or liberty? What good are all these things that you can do if you are hungry out on the streets?
Yeah. Like, that's not actually freedom, guys. I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you're held back by monetary means, like, that's not freedom.
Yeah, and I think that the left, like, we do want people to have all the freedom to do whatever they want. I mean, we want the commune at the end. Whether you're communist or a revolutionary socialist that sees that as a stage 2 communism, or an anarchist, what have you?
Sees it as stage 1.
Yeah, you want to get to complete anarchy, complete freedom, and complete freedom for people to live life how they want. The thing is, we think that you have to build a safe enough, like, society where people are provided for to get to that. Like, you have to, people have to be able to easily survive to truly be free in that way, to truly have those individual freedoms.
Yeah, and I think our society, like, the old maxim, like I was talking about earlier, like, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion or sex or whatever. Mm-hmm. We have a very, like, you do you kind of policy when it comes to other people. And to the point where, like, you do you can turn into, like, some really bad shit. We just are like, well, that's just who they are. Like, there's a lot of that kind of talk happening.
They're just a fascist.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, it's a different time. Oh, it's, they just don't know. They just aren't educated and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, if they aren't educated, fucking educate them. Like, you can't just say, like, sorry, like.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to that first form of liberalism, is just trying to get along, just trying to ease, and I guess it is different when you're talking about working within a party versus just people in your life. You don't have to change everyone's mind on everything.
No, but I think the left, I'm not saying all of the left, and I don't even know what that means anymore. But I think there is a tendency to just completely write people off and say they don't have the right words or language. They are bad about this one issue, so they're fucking out. And instead of doing the work to be like, okay, like, what do they need?
That's true. Yeah, that's what is that called? I think that's called tailism, where you just kind of sort of write off portions of the masses and say, like, they can get it, they're too backward or whatever, and you end up like trailing where the masses could actually be because you don't have you don't have enough faith in them.
Yeah, and you see this, I mean, particularly with like the Democratic left, of just writing off entire sections of the country as like, oh, they're fucking stupid, so like they're not on board, or like that's a lost cause, and you're just like, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, well, that's the way you think when you're a professional loser, so.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
All right, next up, to let things drift if they do not affect one personally, to say as little as possible while knowing perfectly well what is wrong, to be worldly wise and play safe and seek only to avoid blame. This is a third type.
Yes. Okay. I want to talk about this personally, one thing, because that's the thing that really gets stuck in my craw.
Okay.
Obviously, I make art about like my life, and I think it's a very powerful way to reach people. But there is this real sense of gatekeeping when it comes to storytelling about like, well, you're not X, so you can't write about X. And it's like, so what does that mean?
Yeah. I've heard of this. I didn't know if it's correct or not.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you should do your research if you're going to write about a culture or something, some experience you're not familiar with. But like, I think it's unfair to expect that. And I also think it means like you're going to see less diverse stories because like, guess who has time to make art? Like people who are well off.
Yeah.
So I understand where they're coming from. And I think, do your homework. But I guess what I mean to tie it back to this is I think people do, through liberalism, obsessively view things through their own lens. Like how many posts are like, as a XYZ person, I feel whatever. Like people start listing off every identity possible to prove they have credibility.
And you're saying it should be, I don't know, more about empathy or like seeing things from different points of views rather than having to be from that group?
I think so. And I think identity and like community around that identity is very powerful. Like it's great. I love like having a queer friend group and being able to rely on that. But at the same time, I know that like not everyone in my life is queer. Like that's not where I'm at. So I think it's limiting to only accept, takes from people who are directly affected. I think absolutely bring those people into the conversation. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think they have a chance like to get anywhere. I feel like the deck is stacked against them if you only that person can advocate for themselves. Like you have to have solidarity is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Solidarity.
I found a cap.
That's the word. But yeah, that's what he's talking about here in this way is have solidarity with other groups besides just yourself. But then I think he also kind of is targeting folks like me who are quiet types, don't want to, speak up and everything at the meetings, try to play safe and avoid blame. Okay, I get
the avoiding blame thing. I think part of it is that gatekeeping though, because you're worried you're going to say the wrong thing, and that might be why people like keep quiet and like. I mean, that's a big reason why, like, I wanted to do this podcast is because, like, I'm like, I don't know all the fucking words I'm supposed to know.
Yeah, and online leftists are kind of bad about calling people out and doing a bunch of bullshit to each other online.
I saw this tweet something like, oh, there's a general strike happening in Seattle. Did you know that? That's crazy. Like, why isn't the news reporting it? And like half the comments were like, this isn't a general strike. It's a construction worker strike, blah, 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 blah. And it affects different sectors. And I'm like, all right, the point was, guys, there's a big ass strike happening.
Yeah. So we can be very gatekeepy or pedantic about things. Mm-hmm. Which I guess is gonna, I think he brings this up as another time with liberalism. So we'll see. But I don't know. This one's good advice. I think it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Is to, stick your neck out there or whatever. But it's good advice.
It is.
All right. Next up.
Not to obey orders, but to give pride of place to one's own opinions. To demand special consideration from the organization, but to reject its discipline. This is a fourth type.
There you go.
Yeah, I could probably see myself doing this. I am very special.
Yeah.
What if my opinions are just better?
This is the all about me sort of perspective, Again, I think that yes, like at the end of the day, it will be all about you once we're to the commune stage and everything. And this is, I guess, our goal. Like it is all about you to liberate you and everyone else. But like capitalism, liberal ideology has you mystified thinking that you're going to bootstrap it all alone, that you're going to be the rags to riches, the great man of history. That's where people get this idea of, oh, I'm going to be the brilliant one. I'm going to be special consideration so that I can free everyone from, even communists would, I'll free the masses from, and that's like not going to work. You have to work together. I
mean, I know you've said that to me a few times before, is that like everyone thinks they're the main character in their own story. And we've got a few movie suggestions now from listeners about like more communal storytelling of like where there's not just one main guy. One was Battleship Potemkin, which I think was already on our list. Mm-hmm. Western storytelling has a real main character syndrome issue.
Yeah.
We all are the special anime person getting our magic powers when we turn 13.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you're right. I think we're very bad at admitting when we need help. I think we're bad at admitting that our experience isn't the only experience. Like, I think just as a basic empathy problem.
Yeah, yeah. All right, next one. To indulge in personal attacks, pick quarrels, vent personal spite, or seek revenge instead of entering into an argument and struggling against incorrect views for the sake of unity or progress, or getting the work done properly. This is a fifth type.
It's like people being catty bitches.
Yep. Don't be petty.
If I know anything from this podcast is that everyone is super petty. Oh my gosh, we love pettiness.
Yeah, and I'm sure Mal probably indulged in his own pettiness at times. So he's just saying don't do that. I mean, everybody messes up and does it, but it's not something you want to do. I'll fall short, but don't try to fall short.
Yeah, and I think it's hard when you're talking about such big and personal things. Like when someone is wrong, you feel like that person is like bad or stupid or just like why don't they get it, like, and so it can be easy to then characterize them as like a bad, like just fucking cancel them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's not what we're trying to do within our party. We're trying to like get people on the right page, within the left, because we've got to say within the left, because we don't really have super strong.
We don't really have a party.
Yeah. I mean, there are parties out there or movements out there. It's just not super strong in America anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. How do we translate this from party advice? Because he is in a place where he's writing about his own group of like, man, this is what I need to do to get my people together. How do we translate some of this into the current left, which is just, I guess, Twitter. Twitter and DSA and a smattering of other groups.
Well, one is to join a party doing real work.
Yeah, we should probably do that.
Yeah, join a party and show up to meetings and run them and give them direction and try to do like socialism and communism, try to bring that about actively. If there aren't adequate parties doing it, form them and take it on that way. That's one way.
Let's give an example. So like, let's say I'm like, all right, I want to get involved. I'm going to go out and do some mutual aid. I'm going to look up and find an organization in my area that's like giving out free food. Let's say I encounter someone there who's like an asshole or something. You can take your pick. Maybe they are, they're more of an anarchist and you're more of a Marxist-Leninist, or how do you handle, I guess, conflict in that situation?
It seems as though when we go through this, you handle it openly, frankly, and try to keep it on the basis of, I'm not disagreeing with you as a person. I have nothing against you. I'm not trying to cut you down or make you look dumb or anything like that. I'm having this discussion with you because I want to improve what we're both working toward. I want to improve our chances of getting there. And I don't think the way you're looking at it, is going to help us best get there. And here's why. Keep it very much not like me versus you.
Keep it as we're both on the same team here. We're both showing up to this same mutual aid organization. At the end of the day, we're both going to hand out, XYZ many things of food and water. But hey, I think like maybe lay off the weird talk about whatever it is you're doing, or like maybe that's not the best way to convince people that we're cool or something like that.
Yeah, and talk with them about it, and because the shoe could be on the other foot.
Yeah, you could totally fuck up.
Yeah, you could start out this thing thinking one way and talk to them openly and honestly about it, and come to find out, oh, actually, I had the wrong understanding of it. That can happen too. Like that's one of the big messages here, I think, is kind of like subsuming one's ego to the overall mission, right? Like it's not about, do you get to feel good? Who cares, honestly? Like,
yeah, whatever, man.
Yeah, the ultimate goal is so that you feel good, but on the way, we're going to have to do some work, and maybe you're wrong sometimes. Maybe you're on the receiving end of this, and you have to fix it.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, too. So, sorry, listeners, I'm repeating my best marriage advice, which is...
Well, maybe they didn't hear it last time.
Maybe you're new. Hello. I read a lot of advice columns. But, no, this is my own idea, actually. Dear Prudence does not get credit for this. Sorry.
Christine Original
advice column advice, which is, remember you're on the same team and, like, have kind of, like, good faith in terms of, like, intent. Assume good intent, I guess, is the shorter way to say that.
There you go. Yeah. Assume we're all on the left here. We're all trying to free everyone from the death march to extinction. Exactly.
Okay, next up. Who's that Pokemon? To hear incorrect views without rebutting them, and even to hear counter-revolutionary remarks without reporting them, but instead to take them calmly as if nothing had happened. This is a sixth type. Someone out there being like, well, maybe capitalism's okay.
Yeah, that is just right out.
I have a small business, and I think it's pretty good.
Okay, this is interesting, though, because this is it's telling you to be that guy, right? Kind of, it's like opposite, pick your battles.
Yeah, no, this is like, empathy, but to a limit, I feel like is this whole reading. It's like, put down your ego, but also like, don't be afraid to tell people if they're like wrong. So I don't know which one to do.
But that's kind of good. Like, I think...
I mean, the answer's both.
Right, yeah, because like you are putting aside your feelings of, oh, am I going to be awkward about this? Is this going to, is this going to hurt our relationship in any way? Am I going to look like an asshole?
Or are they going to like leave because of you, and then people are mad about that? Like, oh, we don't have enough people and you made Jim leave. And it's like, well, Jim sucked.
Yeah, like you have to put aside those concerns and say, okay, I am doing this so that we can better carry out the struggle. So I have to bring this up. I have to say, hey, landlords are bad,
Yeah, maybe don't do that one.
Yeah, like the best case you can do there is to like be the least of an asshole of a landlord, but even then you're a landlord, like there's limits, and you have to combat that. I think it's certainly within the party. Like, I don't think he's saying like you have to go and be this annoying to people out
in your
the
everyday
world.
life.
Yeah, because like you get exhausted doing that, but it's very important within the party. Again, this whole idea is like we don't want to end up, the slightly bluer Democratic Party.
I think that's the key here. Like, we're talking, like when we say we're on the same team, I think that's why it's really important to define what the team is. You have to be like, look, guys, can we just all agree? I know we're going to disagree on some other things, but can we all just agree that we're anti-capitalist? All right, great. Moving on. Like, you just have to be able to get a baseline of like, we know we are against this thing and for a different thing. That way you won't end up accidentally letting like landlords in. Right.
Reformers or people who just want like, everyone to have a job to get exploited at.
Woo. Love it.
All right. Next up, to be among the masses and fail to conduct propaganda and agitation, or speak at meetings, or conduct investigations and inquiries among them, and instead to be indifferent to them and show no concern for their well-being, forgetting that one is a communist and behaving as if one were an ordinary non-communist. This is a seventh type.
I'm only going to call people communist and non-communist from now on.
There are two types of people.
I like this one. I like it. He's all about being swimming in the masses, and he's taking a dip right here.
Yeah. I think he means to go all out, basically to always be thinking about the party.
Yeah, I think like kind of some proselytizing here.
Yeah, like in whatever way makes sense where you are, like always be, he says, doing research among the people, like firsthand talking to them, like you said, swimming among the masses. But okay, I think myself included and a lot of our listeners don't fancy ourselves like the next Lenin. So maybe what could we do in our context that fits this?
Okay, I think I have some ideas.
Okay.
One is a less confrontational one, and people will probably like you if you do this one, which is to just listen and ask what their problems are.
Yes.
And you, in your little commie brain, can translate it to be like, okay, they're upset because their job sucks. They think it's because, immigrants are coming or something. But like the real reason is probably this, like you can just start asking more questions. Like, people have to talk about themselves. Like, let them talk. You can then take that and be like, and then go back to your party and be like, look, people are really worried about this. And, if we fix the root cause, then maybe they'll stop being like anti-immigrant or something. You know what I mean?
And maybe they'll support us because
Exactly.
we're the people coming out here saying, let's do that,
Yeah. So just like listening and like trying to be empathetic, I think is good. If you feel more comfortable with this person, you want to push back a little, you can like ask leading questions. You can be like, wouldn't it be cool if, you got to work less, and, like kind of sneak them in a little. What do you think?
Well, I think you're talking about the mass line.
Yeah.
Getting from the masses what they want, translating it into Marxism, and presenting it back and saying, what about this? Do you support this? Like, cool, let's do that, and then getting support that way because you're doing shit that people like,
I think that's something that is hilariously so completely lost in the American political system. Like, you will see polls all the time be like, yeah, everyone wants healthcare. It's like, we're not going to fucking do it.
We'll do anything
no
else.
way.
Well, yeah, I think another part of this is that you don't have to be on every second of every day. You know, I mean, like, we're all human, but the exhortation for most regular people here is just try to remind yourself more often. Try to build a perspective that's, like you said, kind of tying back conversations you have with people to the mass struggle, but like, don't forget who you are. Don't forget what side you're on. You know, you want as much as you can, and it's kind of an exercise, it's kind of practice to keep the revolution and your ideals, what you're aiming for. Like, remember that, keep that centered, and then try to also like live your life like that's the case. Because he talks about like, don't behave like an ordinary non-communist. You know, like, if they can't tell you're a communist based on how you're acting, are you really one? You know, the Christian concept of this is faith without works is dead. Like, if you're not actually acting out your faith, then like, do you really have it? You know, and I think for communists could do well, I could do well to like try to live this more in my life is actually doing fucking praxis. Like, theory without praxis is dead.
Yeah, I can too, definitely. Like, I just yap about it for a couple hours a week and call it a day.
Which, yeah, as we said, is something, but could we do more, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, we've gotten very sweet emails that are like, no, you're doing something. It's nice. Shout out to Maggie. I think she sent us an email this week. She was very nice.
Thanks. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, I think you're right that it's important to like know when to use your like communist energy and when to save it.
Yeah.
You know, like, you don't have to go up to your mail person and be like, hey, have you heard about communism? Like, that would be insane. They'd be like, I'm never delivering your mail again. And you have to keep yourself safe too. Like, you can't, you know, do what you need to do is what I'm saying. Look for opportunities though. And if anything, like, I find just like asking questions help. Just like poke at it a little. You don't have to totally convert them, but just getting them thinking like, oh, maybe this isn't like terrible.
Yeah. Get them questioning, honestly. The strongest way that you can convert or convince someone of something is if they get there themselves.
Yes. And like finding, and this sounds like manipulative. I don't mean it in like word ninja way, but like getting them to, like, you do this a lot, is when you're like, oh, like you said, blah, blah, blah. Like, you use their words to like find a solution to their own problem. And they'll be like, yeah, I was right. I was super smart.
Yeah. And, you know, it's manipulative. I mean, but it's also constructive. Yeah. It's you're trying to help them get to where they need to be. That's good. You know?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Next. To see someone harming the interests of the masses and yet not feel indignant or dissuade or stop him or reason with him, but to allow him to continue. This is an 8th type. So this is like, you let a landlord in the meeting and they're like, yeah, I'm going to kick out my tenants. Like, don't do that. Like, or, you know, someone is supporting something that is clearly awful. Like, someone's pro-fracking in there, or someone is, I don't know, anti-labor in some way. Like, yeah, that's not cool.
Exactly. Yeah. And you got to correct them. And again, remember, don't be petty, right? We already covered that. Like, when you're setting people on the right course, and that's not dictatorial either. You're like talking to them and saying, hey, I think this is the case. What, you know, like, let's both get there, because it's not always obvious and you're not always right. Like, you can try and then it turns out, well, they were right. But I mean, again, remember, like you said, you're on the same side.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Try to get on the right page.
And I think it's to a spectrum. Like, we talk a lot about like, yeah, you know, a lot of us have jobs that are like ethically bad because we're in capitalism. So you have to determine, like, you kind of have to meet people where they're at to some extent. I think like landlord is a pretty safe cutoff of like, yeah, don't do that maybe. If you can't. You need to
go find something else to do.
Yeah, that's not a job. That's just property holding. Yeah, I think there's a spectrum of it, you know, like if someone's like, yeah, I work in marketing and like some of my clients are shitty. It's like, I mean, you didn't pick the fucking clients, man. You're just trying to live. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is like, don't completely condemn people for things that you have to look at what people can control realistically, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, most jobs do some evil. Or at least the people you're working for that pay you and allow you to eke out survival, like they do some evil. They do some evil by employing you because they didn't pay you enough, you know, for one.
Yeah, right.
You're always going to be in some sort of a compromise with capitalism till we destroy it. So don't beat yourself up about that, I don't think.
Yeah, or beat other people up and be like, you didn't buy that ethically. It's like, all right, man.
Yeah,
Chill your grill.
I do think we won't have a problem with the part of this that said to see someone harming the interests of the masses and not feeling indignant. I think we're pretty good about
it.
Yeah, we're pretty good about staying angry.
I'm like angry 90% of the time. The other 10%, I'm playing Pokemon. Okay.
All right, next up. To work half-heartedly without a definite plan or direction, to work perfunctorily and muddle along, so long as one remains a monk, one goes on tolling the bell. This is a ninth type.
All right. To me, this is like peak liberalism of just like, that's just politics, man. You lose the election, then you get out there and you try again. And you're like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Because you are just like checking a box.
Right. Yeah. Just doing things the way you've always done it. That's not good for an organization. I mean, it's a good lesson in focus, I guess. Like, I don't know, in my job or life even, a lot of times I'm kind of what he says, muddle through here, and just weeks just kind of happen. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, okay. It's an easy way to end up adrift, like you waste time as a movement, not on a personal level, but as a movement, you'll waste time not doing anything because you're just like posting from day to day, Yeah,
or you're just hung up on like procedures and like, oh, who's taking the minutes and stuff like that. Like some procedure and structure is useful. We've talked a lot about how like it's important to have a party structure that is like, I think it's good to have a structure, but make it flexible. You know what I mean? Like, all right, like we don't have a vice president. Like what, moving on, we've got other things to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know. I think one thing that this reminds me of is how we were saying earlier that the American left situation is pretty scattered and has not been very effective. I think that we've done a lot of this sort of ninth type of liberalism, not really having a definite plan or direction or purpose.
Yeah.
For a long time. And look where we're at. Okay, so like in just the past 20 years, we've had a generationally catastrophic economic meltdown. We found out the government was spying on us always. We lost 2 foreign wars of occupation. We callously let nearly 1 million Americans die in our atrocious response to a global pandemic. These are revolutionary conditions, and what do we have to show for it? We got Bernie and the squad. I mean, that's what working without a definite direction will get you.
Yeah, it's true. Right? It's true. Like we have no buying power in this system anymore. Like we used to be able to scare them into at least giving us fucking Social Security. Mm-hmm. And we can't scare them to do shit now. They're not fucking scared. There are people out in the streets in 2020 and they're like, yeah, we're going to ignore you.
Yeah. They feel like they can do that with impunity because what are we going to do?
Sounds like nothing so far.
Now, I will say, I don't think the left has been the real, like our allies on the left have been half-hearted about what they're doing. I don't think that. I just think it has not had the sort of direction, had the sort of movement. And I've been a part of that because I haven't done the work to do my part either. So, yeah. I mean, part of the blame's on me for that.
It's just such a disparate movement. And I think, again, it goes back to that individualism of everyone's like, well, I'm going to start my podcast and say what I think. And I'm going to tweet fire tweets from my account and I'm going to get really popular. Like it's turned into a very individualist movement. It's turned into almost like a celebrity culture movement. Like it's very disparate and it's very gatekeepy and it's not a mass movement yet.
It doesn't have the solidarity at its core because too many people have bought into that liberal capitalist ideology of, like you were saying, I'll do it on my own, like I'll be the great person. And it's not consciously thinking that, but it's absorbing this cultural, the dominant culture, like the dominant way we see things is through the individual moving things versus mass movements.
Yeah. Next. To regard oneself as having rendered great service to the revolution, to pride oneself on being a veteran, to disdain minor assignments while being quite unequal to major tasks, to be slipshod in work and slack in study. This is a 10th type. All right, yeah, I think this is totally like the gatekeeper type of just like, you don't even fucking know. Like, I've been here since, 2001, and like, yeah, and I catch myself like making excuses for myself. I'm like, oh, I was still a lib then and blah, blah, blah. It's like, fucking who cares? Move on. Like, you're here now. You got on board. I don't care how long it took you. I don't care if you don't know the definitions of everything or the acronyms or whatever the fuck. Like, you're here.
For sure. Yeah, you don't have to be elitist about it. You shouldn't see yourself as like the key figure or, the old guard or whatever. Like, we're all here to do the work, provided we actually show up. I mean, that's one thing, but...
Theoretically, we're here.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely not 10th type because I don't have that sort of confidence. I'm spend half the time being like, man, I'll do enough, and we've
I don't either.
Education is important and stuff, but like last episode, it's like, why am I not health minister, Like, why haven't I already done that?
Come on,
like,
get it together.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's... basically avoid pride, avoid slipshod work, being lazy, basically. So I think it's important.
Okay, next.
To be aware of one's own mistakes and yet make no attempt to correct them, taking a liberal attitude toward oneself. This is an 11th type.
I guess this is like saying, well, like, it's okay if I think this because it just is. Like, you're just being easy on yourself.
I don't know if it's so much easy on yourself. I think here he's kind of saying, okay, right, you probably had some elements of one of the liberalisms. He's done the call out, but now this is kind of the call in. It's not good to like know those things are bad about yourself and then continue doing them.
Yeah, that's true.
Like that, who would do that? Who would continue to do stuff they know, and that's what he's saying here basically is like, hey, that all this stuff, like, you make mistakes, but the worst mistake would be to know, and you know it now, and then to keep doing it.
Yeah. God, how the fuck do we get like a mass left in this country? I don't even know at this point. I just don't.
It's it's a lot of work that
it is.
Seriously need to do more to advance. Not just us. I mean, us doing it won't change things on a large scale on its own. But I think, all our listeners and far beyond that, we need to get more involved in organized revolutionary movements.
And that's not to say that it's not difficult, because I think capitalism and liberalism has done an extraordinary job of distracting us with either pure suffering and also like material distractions and entertainment and culture and like all these things that you could instead be doing. Again, the frame of individualism sets you up as, oh, your problems are unique to you. Everyone has their own story. And so you don't realize, like, no, everyone is struggling with the same thing. Like, we all know who the bad guy is.
Yeah, you feel atomized that it's just, and you need to instead, and I think that's one way you can go from that view of despair to one that is more hopeful, is if you're working with people in mass organizations like that, you convert that atomization to solidarity, and you start seeing, hey, there are other people like me, and collectively we can do a lot more than we can individually posting on Twitter. Yeah. I'll give like kind of a personal example of, like I mentioned earlier, like I make art about my own life, and I'm making like a book about it and like all that shit, and I could very much take that experience and be like, the liberal interpretation of that is like, my story is unique and I am telling it because it has to be told and blah, blah, blah. But like what I have tried to do with it instead is like, because I'm friends with lots of other cartoonists who do similar work, I'm like reading their stories and understanding like, no, there's connections here. And like, I get emails from people being like, oh, I'm not half Mexican like you're writing about, but I'm half, Jamaican, and this is my experience. And instead using a unique experience to relate to other people's unique experiences. Yeah, tying it together instead of setting it apart. That's the goal. We need more of that, yeah. All right. So he says, there's probably more ties, but these are the main ones. And then he says,
Liberalism is extremely harmful in a revolutionary collective. It is corrosive, which eats away unity, undermines cohesion, causes apathy, and creates dissension. It robs the revolutionary ranks of compact organization and strict discipline, prevents policies from being carried through, and alienates the party organizations from the masses, which the party leads. It is an extremely bad tendency. Kind of puts it mildly there at the end. Like, oh, yeah.
In case you're wondering, those are bad. We don't want those. I wrote here that he could have done this up top, given a definition, but we did so it's fine.
He got there eventually. His thesis is a little scattered. It's fine. I'll give him a B.
But yeah, it's good to explain, I guess, still why it's so important for communist parties, for revolutionary movements to focus on liberalism as this tendency that, like you said, can be divisive, can really fuck up the movement from within.
Because again, if you're going along to get along, you're being overly nice to jerks, and you're letting whoever the fuck in, even if they don't agree with your like base level policy. If you're just bending over backwards and not causing conflict to the point of like, what the fuck are you doing? Like that's bad. If
you're not causing conflict, everyone's happy with what you're doing. Are you doing anything?
Not to be a total lib, but there is actually a good Hamilton quote for this.
Ooh, bring it. Bring us the wisdom of the liberals.
Yeah, right. This is the most liberal play ever, but the good line is Hamilton says to Burr, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for?
I used to be all about Hamilton, man. I was
too.
A liberal too.
I saw it and it was really good. It's okay.
We've all been there.
I'm more of a Cats person.
Some of us
now.
haven't. We're just making excuses for ourselves. All right,
okay.
Next. Liberalism stems from petty bourgeois selfishness. It places personal interests first and the interests of the revolution second, and this gives rise to ideological, political, and organizational liberalism. That's what we said earlier.
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense.
People who are liberals look upon the principles of Marxism as abstract dogma. They approve of Marxism but are not prepared to practice it, or to practice it in full. They are not prepared to replace their liberalism by Marxism. These people have their Marxism, but they have their liberalism as well. They talk Marxism but practice liberalism. They apply Marxism to others but liberalism to themselves. They keep both kinds of goods in stock and find a use for each. This is how the minds of certain people work.
That's interesting. I mean, I think, again, this is where you have to remember the context of what his definition of liberalism is, because like we have a lot of people who are not into Marxism at all.
Mm-hmm.
So in this situation, you're talking about someone who is on the left, but like is kind of shitty at it.
Yeah, someone who is, maybe in a movement, right, in a party, someone who, like he says, calls themselves a Marxist and tries to do that, but is bad at it. Or what he says is like at their core or in their mind, they do have still an attachment to basically a holdover from their capitalist days. They have this liberalism. They've been raised in this culture that is very individualistic, and they still have these notions of themselves that come from that capitalist culture, and they hold the two in balance. And they say, well, I want to do what I want to do for the movement, and everything, and I want to help, and I want to liberate people and all that, but I want to make sure that we have a focus on, human rights or individual freedoms, or they have these sorts of hang-ups that they allow to kind of derail themselves. Not to say those things aren't important.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like those things.
But they allow it to be like the main thing.
Okay. So I think this is where having a larger party is very helpful, or at least enough of a place where you can kind of have like a subcommittee situation.
Okay.
Or maybe like a representative sort of council. I don't know, we got an email a while back that I like think about a lot from a trans listener who was like, man, I like what y'all are talking about, but I really worry about like my safety if I'm in a commune that happens to be anti-trans, or, if I'm in an area or a party or whatever it is. Democracy is good, but sometimes not good, which we will do an episode about democracy in the future. But how do you do that in this context? Like, I can't go to a meeting and then like someone says something shitty about like trans people, and then to me that's like, well, I need to speak up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be that would be an example of hearing something counter-revolutionary and not reporting it, right? You'd have to,
Yeah.
be like, we're actually, and I guess human rights is a stupid way to look at it. Like that's something we want. I just mean that it's used as like a Western sort of thing of like, oh, let's go after our geopolitical enemies or distract or whatever.
And use that as a cover.
But we as communists do want it. I mean, we want that's part of it is we want people to be free from oppression. So not a good term to use. My bad there. But
that's okay. We can cut if we want.
Well, we can leave it to acknowledge your mistakes and not to fix them. That's a form of liberalism.
That's true. We're calling you in. No, okay. What about an example of like you have someone at your meeting or whatever and is like, well, you need to support my small business because I'm like a woman who owns a small business. Like, I don't know, they want you to somehow promote their business, or they want you to somehow give them a pass for being a business owner, or like they bring up their concerns as a small business owner all the time. Like, let's say you're like, well, we need to demand healthcare for all. And they're like, well, I can't afford that or something.
Right. Yeah. Why don't we think of the poor small business owners who, whatever. And this is, I think, a good example of someone who is holding their liberalism and their Marxism together. And they're like, I want Marxism for people, but I want liberalism for myself. Right. Like I want to still be able to exploit people as, their labor and everything. But I want to be nice about it, so I want to be a Marxist. I don't know, like that would be a very strange person.
That would be a weirdo.
But
I guess
I think they exist.
They do, like, yeah. It's a thing. I think maybe a good way to differentiate, again, these kinds of freedoms and these kinds of things, like, I know a common complaint about the left is that we are too focused on economics and we therefore are bad at catering to, for lack of a better term, we'll call it identity politics, even though I have an issue with that label. I don't think it's very helpful.
One way to put it maybe is we end up exclusionary.
Yes, okay. Because we're like, oh, well, we don't worry about race. We're all about material needs or whatever.
Yeah, class reductionism is another term you'll hear used.
So maybe it is helpful then because I mean, this text doesn't really get into any of that. So I guess I just want to put as a reminder, like, to me, I think material needs are a good, like, goalpost or almost like a wayfinding device of like, all right, if you are into something that is economically oppressing someone, that's bad. We can all agree that's bad. And I think most social issues you can tie back to economics pretty easily. So you can also be like, okay, that one's bad too.
Yeah.
So like, let's say someone is like, this is a weird example. I'm trying to think of like an example, but let's say someone's like, well, I can't afford to, give people enough like maternity leave or something like that. And it's like, well, you could, instead of saying like, well, you're anti-feminist because of this, you can be like, well, you're like materially hurting people. Like this, like finding a way to tie identity into economics, and not to reduce people to dollar signs, but to understand like these things are connected. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. I think another way to do that, or in addition to that, is if we're talking to fellow party members here, fellow people on the left, and we've said this before in the episode on queer theory, was that when you're fighting for the rights of oppressed groups, they're oppressed by the same guy that's oppressing cis white people too. And that's capitalism. So if it's your common enemy, even if for some reason you don't specifically care about the rights of these groups because you just haven't figured that out yet for whatever reason. I mean, figure it out. But like, you should be an ally with those groups in their struggles. You should be in solidarity with them and fight against their oppressor because you're fighting against the same guy, right? You're fighting against capitalism.
If you're a person who doesn't understand why we're always talking about identity or something within the left, if you improve conditions for those people, like all conditions will be improved. Like things like, let's say someone is upset about insurance and you're just trying to get, we can just say healthcare for all, but like maybe there's someone who's like, I want a specific policy that protects gay couples or non-monogamous couples or whatever it is. That could also be really good for a straight person. Because what if you like don't have a spouse and like you want someone as a beneficiary or something like that? Like a lot of these policies end up benefiting other groups and the people they were specifically designed for.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's a broader coalition.
Yeah, and also it's just like the right thing to do, guys. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's the moral argument of it is.
Don't be a dick.
All right, next up. Liberalism is a manifestation of opportunism and conflicts fundamentally with Marxism. It is negative and objectively has the effect of helping the enemy. That is why the enemy welcomes its preservation in our midst. Such being its nature, there should be no place for it in the ranks of the revolution.
Okay, talk about the enemy being into this. I like that.
Yeah. Well, it's the dominant ideology of capitalism, right? The capitalists have this liberal idea of things. Again, we're not meaning the American left. They're not hyper woke. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like individualism at the expense of people. The fundamental thing of capitalism, right, is that you can exploit people for your gain, and that's good. Greed is good. What he's saying here is that we cannot, we can't allow, we have to focus on making sure that we're not giving into, or we're not like starting to slip into the easy thing, which is to see the world the way the dominant thing in society sees it, and just to be like everyone else, to be like a regular non-communist, as he says, we have to fight that quite natural urge and instead be dedicated to, at our core, the communist movement. And we have to root that out. We have to, the enemy, capitalism, wants to see us just kind of slip off to the side and end up, begging for scraps. That's what they want. We have to fight against that.
Yeah, and it's very tempting to. I mean, that is the culture we were raised in. It is what is expected. Like, think about when you try to talk to people about these things. A lot of people be like, oh, that's fucking science fiction. It is this outlandish idea.
Yeah.
We must use Marxism, which is positive in spirit, to overcome liberalism, which is negative. A communist should have largeness of mind, big brain, and he should be staunch and active, looking upon the interests of the revolution as his very life and subordinating his personal interests to those of the revolution. Always and everywhere, he should adhere to principle and wage a tireless struggle against all incorrect ideas and actions so as to consolidate the collective life of the party and strengthen the ties between the party and the masses. He should be more concerned about the party and the masses than about any private person, and more concerned about others than about himself. Only thus can he be considered a communist. Really good summary there, I think.
Yeah. I do think he's focusing on these are like true 100% party members who have to do this, right?
Yes, yes. It's not just everybody.
Right, yeah, because you can not everyone who is going to like kind of help the movement when the time comes is going to be like a dedicated party cadre person. Yeah, yeah. But the real vanguard guys, like they have to be on board in their hearts and in the world. Right,
in
they
their
have to
actions.
really be doing things. Yeah, I think he's kind of summing up those earlier ideas.
Yeah.
The last line here: all loyal, honest, active, and upright communists must unite to oppose the liberal tendency shown by certain people among us and set them on the right path. This is one of the tasks of our ideological front.
I like that he ends with again setting them on the right path and not just like necessarily kicking them out. I think communism has a reputation for some purges, and it definitely has happened.
Mao did them.
Mao did them. He did a lot of those. He said, no, get out of here. I think maybe he should have reread this text first. Be like, maybe I can have a conversation and put my ego aside.
Am I being petty? Yeah.
Yeah, right. But maybe those guys were like, no, I want to be a landlord and a small business owner. And he's like, I'm sorry, I have to kill you. Overall, I'm into this. I don't know. This just makes me wish we had a larger left so we could like do these things. I'd love to argue with someone over the finer points of leftism. Why can't we do that?
Well, we can join existing organizations and make them larger.
That's
we
true.
Could start our own organizations and build those. There are many ways. We know of there being many ways. Now, not to do that would be the 11th form of liberalism.
This is like that trap in Christianity where they're like, well, as soon as you hear about Jesus, you have to believe or you're going to hell. Fuck, you guys have all been infected.
Here we go.
Going to communist hell if you don't do anything.
This isn't as condemning either, but it's just saying,
Going to hell.
yeah, it's just saying, come on, what even are you doing if you realize these mistakes that you're making and then don't try to do something about that? I think that's a big part too, because like it does, I think we should have an acknowledgement that not everyone's going to be a perfect communist all the time. Like we just spend a lot of time talking about how we're not.
We're shit.
And that's fine. Like it's fine that is the case. It's not fine to not try to do something about it, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Because then are you really a communist, you know?
Yeah, then you're just a kind of a historian at that point in our case.
Yeah.
Which I think is good, but
all right. You want to do a star rating of this?
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm going to go first because I don't want to copy you.
Oh yeah. Why don't you go first?
I don't think that I'm going to copy you though, because I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 stars.
Ooh, okay.
I like it. I think about this text a lot.
Really?
I've been trying to kind of work it into my life of like, am I on the right path of living as a communist, or am I muddling along as an ordinary non-communist, you know?
Wow, that's so interesting.
I don't know. It's not the best for like if you're trying to feel good about yourself. Maybe.
No, I'm worried about you. You got communist imposter syndrome.
But I think hopefully it will help me not feel that much in the future if I start doing stuff to change that, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because I'm hard in the other way where I'm like overly comforting to myself to the point where I'm like, it's fine if you don't do anything today. So sometimes I need a little discipline. Yeah, I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5, and it's mostly because I think if you read this without context and without the historical definition of what he means by liberalism, I think if you read this without reading it from like, okay, this is if you're in a party and not like right now, like we had to do a bit of translating, and to make this make sense for today's movement, which is very different, which is fine. And I think this is something I would defo like bookmark for that future where we do have a larger party, or like the future where I am more involved in a party and I'm like, okay, cool. I disagree with somebody today. What do I do about it? Let me see what Mao has to say. So I think it's good for resolving conflict in that way.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's also not a good intro text to
definitely not.
Probably don't lead with this if you're trying to.
Oh no, what if this was your first episode?
Yeah, we have to put something up top.
Go back.
Go listen to a few first. This is a 201, 301 course. It's not.
It's an AP course.
Yeah.
Got every prerequisites.
But you're right.
Yeah, that's my main problem with it. Like, I like how short it is, and it was, pretty easy to understand. There weren't any, like, crazy... I mean, besides, like, the whole historical context, there weren't any crazy, like, definitions I felt like were, references or weird words or something. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, like, Lenin's always talking shit about a fellow, leftist writer or something.
True. He's always got a name drop.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the big purposes of this is to preach to the choir, but in a good way, in sort of like, hey, I know that we're all communists here, but like, let's make sure that we're like on the right track still,
Yeah. Making sure you're on the same page with people, making sure you're listening to everyone in the group without necessarily like catering to every single thing they want. And with the masses as well, making sure you're listening to them. Like it's good in a way, like if you could, if you wanted to, twist this to be a little bit individualistic in that it's important, like when you're talking to someone or you're in a relationship with someone or whatever it is, like you want to have empathy with that person and work things through, but you also need to know when to walk away. And I feel like this kind of applies to this text too. It's like, yeah, ideally you both come to an agreement, whether you change their mind, they change your mind, whatever, and they stay in the party and you keep on going. But like there could be a situation where they're just like they're jerks and they need to go.
They're liberals. See ya. There's the door.
Yeah, bye.
Don't come back.
Yeah. But the other side of that is like if you're too accommodating in this terminology, if you're too liberal and just say, well, let's listen to them, let's give them a seat at the table, like then you could end up working for a liberal party. Oops, all Democrats. You messed up.
You end up as a nonprofit
oh no
NGO. Yeah.
Oh no, you just elected a do nothing senator. Aw. Bummer.
All senators are do nothing senators.
That's true.
I mean, Bernie, I like him.
I like him. He gets one. He gets a pass.
He gets like a historic pass though, because I mean, like lately he's just chilling for Build Back Better. I don't know. He's not doing much, but
No, yeah. He gets a respect pass of like, all right, man, you tried. You can enjoy your days in solitude and
live out
rest.
your time.
Send him to the pasture. Oh, okay. Cool. What are we doing next week?
Next week we're going to be covering the first Red Scare.
Ooh, spooky.
Yeah.
So this is the 20s one? The one of the 20s?
Yeah, around that time.
Okay, good. I did it.
We'll go into detail time-wise and all that
Okay, cool.
in our episode. Just a little bit of history, a little discussion, that sort of thing.
Hell yeah.
There's lots to cover in it, so it'll be more of like a survey of it and
okay.
just kind of stop and ask questions as we go, sort of thing.
All right, time to make my big bowl of spaghetti.
Nice. Enjoy it.
All right. See y'all next week. Well, I won't because I'm recording a podcast and that's not how podcasts work, but you'll hear me next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Hey there, comrades. Just jumping in to remind you of all of our social media. We are on Twitter at teachcommunism, Instagram at teachmecommunism. You can shoot us an email. That's teachmecommunism@gmail.com. Any of those places are good to send us an episode suggestion or a question, anything you think would be useful feedback for us, or just your admiration. If you want to admire us in a public manner, and you should, you can go to Apple Podcasts to give us a review. It is the best way to help people find the show. Love when people rate and review us. Please do both. We are also on YouTube, if that's how you prefer to listen to podcasts, or if you know someone that's the only way they'll listen to podcasts, send them to our page. And we have a Patreon. For $5 a month, you get access to our notes for each week's episode, including the backlog of notes, which is a very handy resource for up-and-coming commies. And at the end of the year, all of the funds from Patreon will be given to local mutual aid in the DFW area. So, ain't going to line our pockets. Finally, we have merch. Check us out at TeePublic. You can find shirts and I believe also stickers and magnets and all kinds of fun stuff with catchphrases from the show or episode art, stuff like that. The link to that store is in the show notes, so check that out. Okay, that's all the internet. Join us next time for another episode of Teach Me Communism, where the class struggle is always in session. Bye, y'all.